The thundering hooves of a spooked horse nearly drowned out the church bells as Catherine Wilson tore through the main street of Sonora, California. Her white wedding gown billowing behind her like the sails of a ship caught in a storm. The year was 1876, and Catherine had just made the most impulsive decision of her 22 years of life. She had fled from her own wedding. The expensive satin dress, which had been ordered specially from San Francisco, was now torn at the hem and splattered with mud. One sleeve had ripped at the shoulder, exposing her skin to the cool autumn air. Her veil had long since flown away, probably caught on some fence post or tree branch miles back. Her auburn hair, which her mother had spent an hour arranging into an elegant updo, now tumbled wildly around her shoulders. Catherine didn't care. She was free from a marriage to Harold Blackburn, the banker's son who was 15 years her senior. Free from the life her parents had so carefully arranged for her, a life of security but not love, of comfort but not passion. A life that had been decided for her the moment her father's mining investments had failed, leaving the family teetering on the edge of financial ruin. She hadn't planned to run. Even as she'd stood at the back of the church, her father's arm linked with hers, she'd been resigned to her fate. But then she'd caught Harold's expression as she walked down the aisle, not one of adoration or even affection, but of smug satisfaction, like a man who had just closed a particularly profitable business deal. In that moment, something inside Catherine had snapped. She had dropped her bouquet, gathered her skirts, and bolted. Now, as she ran blindly through town, her breath coming in sharp gasps, she had no plan, no money, and nowhere to go. Her dramatic escape had carried her this far on pure adrenaline, but reality was quickly catching up. The sound of pursuit wasn't far behind, angry shouts and the rumble of horses' hooves growing louder with each passing second. "Get back here, Catherine. Don't be a fool." Her father's voice carried on the wind. Panic surged through her veins. She veered off the main street, ducking between two buildings and into an alleyway that led toward the outskirts of town. Her satin slippers, dyed to match her dress, were never meant for running and had already begun to fall apart. One heel caught in a crack between the wooden planks and Catherine stumbled, falling hard onto her knees. Pain shot through her legs, but she scrambled back to her feet, the delicate fabric of her dress tearing further. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not cry. Not now. Not when her freedom hung by such a tenuous thread. She emerged from the alley near the livery stable, where the dusty road continued out of town and into the sprawling countryside. If she could just make it past the town limits, perhaps she could lose herself in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was a desperate plan, but it was all she had. "Miss, hold up there." Catherine froze at the deep, unfamiliar voice. Slowly, she turned, expecting to see one of Harold's friends or her father's business associates coming to drag her back to the church. Instead, she found herself looking up at a tall, broad-shouldered man with sun-bronzed skin and the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. He sat astride a magnificent chestnut stallion, his posture easy and confident in the saddle. He wore a worn leather vest over a simple cotton shirt, dusty denim trousers, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. A cowboy. A stranger. "Looks like you're in a bit of trouble," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl. His eyes took in her torn dress, muddy hem, and the wild look of fear on her face. Then he glanced past her toward the sounds of pursuit that were growing ever closer. Catherine stepped back, unsure whether this man represented help or another obstacle. "I need to get away from here," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, Then something in his expression softened. Without a word, he swung down from his horse in one fluid motion. He shrugged off his long canvas duster coat and held it out to her. "Take this," he said. "That dress is drawing too much attention." Catherine hesitated for only a second before accepting the coat. It was warm from his body and smelled of leather, horses, and the open prairie. She quickly pulled it on over her torn gown, grateful for the cover it provided. The shouts were getting louder. Someone called her name. The cowboy's jaw tightened as he glanced toward the commotion. Then he made a quick decision. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Catherine answered without hesitation. Her father had taught her to ride when she was a child, before social expectations had forced her to adopt more ladylike pursuits. In one swift movement, the cowboy lifted her onto his horse. "Head north along the creek," he instructed, adjusting the stirrups. "There's a small cabin about 5 miles up. Wait for me there." "But what about you? This is your horse," Catherine protested, even as her hands instinctively gripped the reins. "I'll be fine. Name's Yates. Yancey Yates." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "Go on now. That's Thunderbolt you're sitting on, and he's the fastest horse in the county. He'll get you to safety." Catherine opened her mouth to thank him, but the sound of men on horseback rounding the corner spurred her into action. She pressed her heels into the stallion's sides, and Thunderbolt responded immediately, leaping forward with powerful strides. As she galloped away from town, Catherine risked one glance back. The cowboy Yancey stood in the middle of the road, facing the approaching search party. He had effectively positioned himself as a barrier between her and her pursuers. The wind rushed past her ears as Thunderbolt carried her away from Sonora, away from a future that had been chosen for her, and toward an uncertain destiny of her own making. The weight of the stranger's coat around her shoulders felt like a shield, and the powerful horse beneath her offered a freedom she'd never dared to imagine. Catherine Wilson, runaway bride, turned her face forward and rode toward the setting sun. Yancey Yates watched until the young woman disappeared around a bend in the road, his duster billowing around her like a protective cloak. He hadn't planned on giving away his horse when he rode into Sonora that afternoon, but there was something in her eyes, a fierce determination mixed with raw terror, that had stirred something long dormant within him. He turned to face the approaching riders. There were 5 of them. A red-faced older man who could only be the girl's father, a well-dressed young man with a sour expression who Yancey pegged as the abandoned groom, and 3 others who looked like the town's more prominent citizens. "You there, cowboy." The older man reined in his horse sharply. "Did you see a young woman run by, white dress, auburn hair?" Yancey hooked his thumbs in his belt loops and affected a casual stance. "Can't say that I have, sir. Just arrived in town myself." The well-dressed man narrowed his eyes. "Then where's your horse, cowboy?" "Stabled him," Yancey lied smoothly. "Been riding hard for 3 days. Figured he deserved a rest." The older man, clearly the father, studied him suspiciously. "My daughter has run off from her wedding. It's caused quite a scandal and she's not thinking clearly." "If you're hiding information, like I said, I haven't seen any runaway brides." Yancey met the man's gaze steadily. "Though I can't say I blame a woman for changing her mind about who she weds. That's a mighty important decision." The groom's face flushed with anger. "How dare you, Harold, please," the father interrupted. "Let's continue searching. She can't have gone far on foot." He turned his horse around. "She'll realize her foolishness soon enough when night falls and she has nowhere to go." The search party continued down the road, casting suspicious glances back at Yancey as they went. Once they were out of sight, he let out a long breath and started walking in the opposite direction from where Catherine had fled. He needed to circle around and make his way to the cabin without being followed. It would be a long walk, but Yancey was used to hardship. At 30 years old, he had spent more than half his life on the move, working cattle drives, breaking horses, and occasionally hunting bounties when money was particularly tight. He had come to California to start fresh, having purchased a small plot of land near the foothills with savings from years of hard work. The cabin he had directed Catherine to was his own, a modest one-room structure he had built with his bare hands over the past few months. It wasn't much, but it was the first place he had ever truly owned. As he walked, Yancey contemplated the strange turn his day had taken. He had ridden into Sonora simply to purchase supplies, nails, coffee, ammunition, and now he had given his prized horse to a fleeing bride. Thunderbolt wasn't just any horse. The chestnut stallion had been his loyal companion for 7 years, through blizzards, desert heat, and everything in between. But something in the woman's desperate flight had resonated with him. Yancey understood what it meant to run from a life you didn't choose. His own past had taught him that lesson all too well. The sun was beginning to set by the time Yancey had hiked to higher ground, cutting across country instead of following the winding creek trail. The October air grew chilly as darkness approached, and he picked up his pace. Without his duster, the cold seeped through his cotton shirt, reminding him that winter wasn't far off. He approached his cabin cautiously, scanning the surrounding area for any signs that the search party had tracked Catherine there. The small structure sat nestled among a grove of pine trees, with the creek bubbling nearby. Smoke rose from the stone chimney she had figured out how to light the fire. Thunderbolt was tethered to a post near the lean-to that served as a basic stable, contentedly munching on some hay. Yancey paused at the edge of the clearing, suddenly uncertain. He had acted on instinct when he helped the woman escape, but now reality was setting in. He had harbored a runaway bride, lied to her family, and potentially made an enemy of some of Sonora's most influential citizens. And for what? He didn't even know her, beyond the desperation in her eyes and the determination in her stance. Before he could contemplate further, the cabin door opened, and Catherine stepped out, still wearing his oversized duster. She carried his rifle, holding it with obvious uncertainty but pointed in his general direction. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the situation. "I know how to use this." Yancey stepped out of the shadows with his hands raised slightly. "I sincerely hope you don't, at least not when it's pointed at me." Relief washed over her face. "Mr. Yates." She lowered the rifle immediately. "I'm sorry. I heard something moving out there and I—" She trailed off, looking embarrassed. "You did the right thing," Yancey assured her, approaching slowly. "Though I'd appreciate it if you'd point that rifle somewhere else." Catherine quickly set the weapon aside, leaning it against the cabin wall. In the fading daylight, Yancey could see her more clearly than during their brief encounter in town. Her auburn hair cascaded over her shoulders in loose waves, and her eyes, which he now saw were a deep green, held a mixture of exhaustion and wariness. Despite the mud and tears on her wedding dress visible beneath his coat, she carried herself with dignity. "I didn't think you would come," she admitted. "I thought perhaps you had just given me your horse to be rid of me." Yancey climbed the 2 steps to the cabin's small porch. "That's quite a valuable horse to give away to be rid of someone." He offered her a small smile. "Besides, this is my home. Where else would I go?" Catherine's eyes widened. "Your home? I've imposed on your home." She looked around as if seeing the cabin in a new light. "I'm so sorry." "I didn't realize I can leave if—" "It's all right," Yancey interrupted her. "You're welcome to stay the night. It'll be safer than trying to travel in the dark, especially with search parties likely still combing the area." He gestured toward the open door. "Shall we go inside? It's getting cold out here." The interior of Yancey's cabin was modest but neat. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking pot hanging over the flames. A small table with two hand-carved chairs sat in one corner. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt occupied another. Shelves lined one wall, holding books, tools, and various supplies. It was the home of a man who lived simply but not without comfort. Catherine stood awkwardly in the center of the room, clutching his duster around her as if it were armor. "I've made a terrible mess of things, haven't I?" she said quietly. Yancey busied himself adding another log to the fire. "I don't know your story, but I reckon if you felt the need to run from your own wedding, you had good reasons." Catherine sank into one of the chairs, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. "My name is Catherine Wilson. My father was a successful mine investor until last year when 3 of his major investments failed. We lost almost everything." She twisted her hands in her lap. "Harold Blackburn's father owns the bank that holds what's left of my father's assets. The marriage was an arrangement." "An arrangement," Yancey repeated, the distaste evident in his tone. "And you weren't consulted?" "I was informed," Catherine corrected. "There's a difference." Yancey nodded, understanding all too well how adults could make life-altering decisions for others without considering their feelings. "And so you ran." "I didn't plan to," she said, the words tumbling out faster now. "I was going to go through with it, I really was, for my family's sake. But then I saw Harold's face at the altar. He looked triumphant, like he'd won something. Not like a man who was about to pledge his life to someone he loved." She shook her head. "In that moment, I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't bind myself to a man who saw me as nothing more than a possession to be acquired." Yancey pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her. "That took courage." Catherine gave a small, bitter laugh. "Or foolishness. I have no money, no possessions beyond this ruined dress. My family will be disgraced. Harold's father will likely foreclose on my father's remaining properties out of spite." She looked up at him, her green eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I've probably destroyed my family to save myself." "Sometimes saving yourself is the only choice you have," Yancey said quietly. He stood and moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a clean shirt and a pair of trousers that had grown too small for him. "These might be big on you, but they're better than staying in that dress. You can change behind that screen." He nodded toward a folding wooden screen in the corner that hid a washstand. Catherine accepted the clothes with a grateful nod and disappeared behind the screen. Yancey busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans, dried beef, and cornbread he had baked the day before. He heard the rustle of fabric and the occasional soft curse as Catherine struggled with her wedding dress. "You need help?" he called after a particularly frustrated sound. There was a pause. "The buttons down the back. I can't reach them all." Yancey approached the screen. "May I, please?" He stepped around the screen to find Catherine standing with her back to him, still in her wedding dress, though she had managed to undo many of the buttons. The dress gaped open, revealing the white corset beneath. Yancey focused on the remaining buttons, trying to ignore the curve of her neck and the soft wisps of auburn hair that had escaped her disheveled updo. His calloused fingers were surprisingly nimble as he undid the remaining buttons. "There," he said, stepping back quickly. "I'll let you finish." Back in the main room, Yancey set 2 tin plates on the table and filled 2 cups with water from a pitcher. He tried not to think about the fact that he had a beautiful woman changing clothes in his cabin, or the way his heart had quickened when she had looked at him with those expressive green eyes. Catherine emerged a few minutes later wearing his clothes. The trousers were rolled up several times at the ankles, and she had tied a piece of rope around the waist to keep them up. The shirt hung loosely on her frame, but she had tucked it in as best she could. She had washed her face, and her hair was pulled back in a simple braid. "I feel human again," she said with a small smile. "Thank you." Yancey gestured to the table. "It's not much, but you're welcome to share my dinner." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl outside. Catherine ate with surprising enthusiasm, and Yancey realized she had probably missed her wedding breakfast in all the chaos. "What will you do now?" he asked finally, as she finished the last of her cornbread. Catherine set down her fork and stared into her empty plate. "I don't know. I can't go back to Sonora, that's certain. I have an aunt in Sacramento who might take me in, but—" She shrugged. "She's my mother's sister. She would likely just send word to my parents." "You could head farther north," Yancey suggested, "or even east to Nevada. Plenty of towns where no one would know you." "And do what?" Catherine asked, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "I was raised to be a suitable wife for a man of means. I can play the piano, embroider handkerchiefs, and recite poetry in French. None of that is particularly useful for earning a living." Yancey considered this. "You could teach. Schools are always looking for educated women to teach the younger children." Catherine's expression brightened slightly. "I hadn't thought of that. I do enjoy children." Then her face fell again. "But I have no references, no certificates. Who would hire me?" "Frontier towns aren't always particular about such things," Yancey said. "They're often just grateful to have someone who can read and write better than they can." They fell silent again, each lost in thought. The fire popped and sparked, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the night had fully descended, and with it came the myriad sounds of the wilderness. The rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft murmuring of the creek. "You could stay here for a few days," Yancey found himself saying. "Until you figure out your next move. I'll sleep outside in the lean-to. You'll be safe here." Catherine looked at him with surprise. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." "I've already imposed on your generosity far more than any stranger should." It was a fair question, and one Yancey wasn't entirely sure he could answer. Why had he given his horse to this woman? Why had he lied to protect her? Why was he now offering his home as sanctuary? "I know what it's like to be forced into a life you didn't choose," he said finally. "When I was 16, my father decided I would follow him into the mining business. I had no interest in spending my days underground, but my opinion wasn't considered important." He ran a hand through his dark hair. "So I left in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on my back and a borrowed horse." "What happened?" Catherine asked softly. Yancey's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I nearly starved the first month. Then I found work with a cattle drive heading north from Texas. Learned to rope and ride from some of the best cowboys in the business. Made my own way ever since. And your family?" Sent a letter to my mother after a few years, letting her know I was alive. She wrote back, said my father had disowned me. He shrugged as if it didn't matter, though the old pain flickered briefly in his eyes. "Haven't been back since." Catherine reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "I'm sorry." The touch was unexpected, and Yancey felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the fire. Her hand was soft against his weather-roughened one, a contrast that somehow seemed right. "It was a long time ago," he said, gently withdrawing his hand. "The point is, I understand something about starting over, and sometimes folks need a helping hand when they do." Catherine nodded, suppressing a yawn. "You should get some sleep," Yancey said, standing and gathering the plates. "Take the bed." "I'll be comfortable enough in the lean-to with Thunderbolt." Catherine protested, but Yancey insisted. He collected a spare blanket and pillow before bidding her good night and stepping out into the cool evening air. As he settled into the makeshift bed in the lean-to, he could hear Thunderbolt's steady breathing nearby. "What have you gotten us into, old friend?" he murmured to the horse, who flicked an ear in response. Yancey stared up at the stars visible through the gaps in the lean-to roof, wondering why the image of Catherine Wilson's green eyes and determined expression seemed imprinted on his mind. He had spent years avoiding entanglements, especially with women who might want more than he could give. His life as a cowboy had taught him to value freedom above all else. Yet here he was, harboring a runaway bride and feeling something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in a very long time, if ever. As sleep finally claimed him, Yancey decided he would worry about it tomorrow. For now, both he and Catherine Wilson had survived another day on their own terms. In his experience, that was sometimes the best you could hope for. Dawn broke over the foothills with a riot of color streaks of gold and pink, illuminating the sparse clouds. Catherine woke to the unfamiliar surroundings of Yancey's cabin, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous day came rushing back. She had actually done it. She had run from her wedding, fled from Sonora, and was now hiding in a stranger's cabin miles from everything she had ever known. She sat up, pushing the patchwork quilt aside. The fire had burned down to embers overnight, and the cabin was chilly. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of the enormity of her decision. There would be no going back now. The scandal would be too great, the humiliation for both families too public. She had burned her bridges thoroughly. The sound of chopping wood outside drew her attention. Peering through the small window, she saw Yancey, his broad shoulders and strong arms making quick work of a pine log. He had already worked up a sweat, despite the cool morning air, and had stripped down to his undershirt. Catherine found herself watching the play of muscles across his back as he swung the axe with practiced ease. She quickly stepped away from the window, her cheeks warming. It wasn't proper to stare at a man like that, particularly one who had been nothing but kind and respectful toward her. She busied herself rekindling the fire from the remaining embers, a skill she had learned during summer camping trips with her father before he had decided such activities were unsuitable for a young lady. By the time Yancey entered with an armload of split wood, Catherine had the fire crackling cheerfully and was examining the contents of his pantry to see about preparing breakfast. "Good morning," he said, depositing the wood in a box beside the fireplace. "Sleep well," Catherine nodded. "Better than I expected, considering everything. I hope you were comfortable in the lean-to." "I've slept in worse places," Yancey assured her. He glanced at the pantry shelves. "Not much there for a proper breakfast, I'm afraid. I was planning to stock up in town yesterday before I got distracted." Catherine smiled slightly. "Is that what I am? A distraction?" The corner of Yancey's mouth lifted in response. "A most unexpected one." There was something in the way he looked at her that made Catherine's heart beat a little faster. It wasn't the calculating assessment she was used to from men like Harold Blackburn, who had always looked at her as if appraising her value. Yancey's blue eyes held warmth and a gentle curiosity, as if he genuinely wanted to understand who she was. "I found some eggs," she said, breaking the moment. "And there's coffee. I could make breakfast while you finish your chores." Yancey looked surprised. "You know how to cook?" "I'm not completely helpless," Catherine said with a touch of defensiveness. "My mother believed a lady should know how to direct household staff properly, which meant understanding the basics of cooking and cleaning, even if one would never do such tasks oneself." "Well then, I accept your offer," Yancey said with a small bow. "It's been a while since anyone cooked for me." While Yancey went to tend to Thunderbolt and check his small garden plot, Catherine busied herself with breakfast preparations. The simplicity of the task was oddly comforting, measuring coffee into the pot, heating the cast iron skillet, cracking eggs into the hot surface. It was a far cry from the elaborate breakfast that would have followed her wedding, but somehow more satisfying. They ate at the small table, sunlight streaming through the windows and turning the rough-hewn wood golden. Catherine found herself studying Yancey's face in the morning light. He wasn't classically handsome like some of the suitors who had courted her before her family's financial troubles. His nose had been broken at some point, his skin was weathered from years in the sun, and a thin scar ran along his jawline. But there was a strength and steadiness to his features that she found appealing. "What will you do today?" Yancey asked, breaking into her thoughts. Catherine set down her coffee cup. "I should move on, I suppose. I've imposed on your hospitality enough already." "There's no rush," Yancey said. "The search parties will still be looking for you. It might be wiser to lie low for another day or two. Won't that cause problems for you? If they find me here, you could be accused of kidnapping or worse." Yancey shrugged. "I doubt they'll look this far out. Besides, I can always say you arrived on your own and I was just offering Christian charity to a woman in distress." Catherine smiled ruefully. "A woman in men's clothing, hiding in a bachelor's cabin. I'm not sure that explanation would satisfy anyone, especially not Harold Blackburn." "Perhaps not," Yancey conceded. "But I'm not overly concerned with Harold Blackburn's satisfaction." There was a hint of steel beneath his casual tone that reminded Catherine that this man, for all his kindness to her, was no pushover. He had survived years on his own in a harsh and unforgiving land, and there was a quiet confidence about him that spoke of someone who could handle himself in difficult situations. "If you're sure it's no imposition, I would appreciate another day to gather my thoughts and plan my next steps," Catherine said. "It's settled then," Yancey said, rising from the table. "I need to repair some fencing on the north side of the property today. Will you be all right here alone?" Catherine nodded. "I'll be fine. Perhaps I could wash these clothes," she gestured to her borrowed attire, "and maybe salvage what I can of my dress. The fabric is good quality even if the dress itself is ruined. There's a washing tub behind the cabin, and the creek is just down the path if you need water," Yancey said. "There should be soap in the trunk. Help yourself to anything you need." After Yancey left with his tools, Catherine set about making the cabin more presentable. It was already neat for a bachelor's home, but there was dust on the shelves and the floor needed sweeping. She found a broom in the corner and set to work, finding an unexpected pleasure in the simple task. It occurred to her, as she folded Yancey's spare clothes and placed them in the trunk, that in 22 years of life, she had never been truly alone before. There had always been family, servants, friends, or chaperones nearby. Even when she read or painted supposedly solitary activities, someone was always within calling distance. This solitude, this quiet, was new and strangely liberating. No one was watching her, judging her posture or her manners. No one was waiting for her to make a mistake. She could simply be. By midday, Catherine had cleaned the cabin, washed her borrowed clothes, which now hung drying on a line she had strung between two trees, and examined her wedding dress. The beautiful satin gown was beyond repair for its original purpose. The hem was torn and muddy. One sleeve was ripped at the shoulder, and there was a long tear down the back where she had caught it on something during her escape. But the fabric was still good, and with some work, she might be able to make something practical from it. She was sitting on the cabin's small porch, carefully unpicking the seams of the dress, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Fear shot through her, and she quickly gathered the dress and retreated inside, closing the door behind her. She peered cautiously through the window, expecting to see her father or Harold or the sheriff. Instead, she saw a woman riding a dappled mare. The woman was perhaps in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair tied back in a practical bun. She wore a simple riding skirt and jacket, and there was a basket secured to her saddle. The woman reined in her horse near the cabin and called out, "Hello, the house. Yancey Yates, are you home?" Catherine hesitated, unsure what to do. The woman didn't appear threatening, but Catherine was acutely aware of how suspicious her presence in Yancey's cabin would appear. Before she could decide, the woman dismounted and approached the porch. "I know someone's in there. I saw the washing on the line. If Yancey's not home, perhaps you could tell me where to find him." Taking a deep breath, Catherine opened the door partially. "Mr. Yates is repairing fences on the north side of the property," she said, keeping her tone polite but reserved. "May I ask who's calling?" The woman's eyebrows rose at the sight of Catherine, taking in her borrowed clothes and the careful way she was hiding behind the partially open door. "I'm Martha Johnson. My husband and I own the neighboring ranch." Her eyes were sharp but not unkind. "And you would be?" "Catherine," she replied, deliberately omitting her last name. "I'm a friend of Mr. Yates." "A friend," Martha repeated, a hint of skepticism in her voice. "Well, Catherine, I've brought some fresh bread and preserves for Yancey. He helped my husband round up some strays last week, and I like to pay my debts." She held up the basket. Catherine opened the door wider and accepted the basket. "That's very kind of you. I'm sure Mr. Yates will appreciate it." Martha made no move to leave. Instead, she studied Catherine with increasing curiosity. "Forgive me for being forward, but you're not from around here, are you?" "No, madam. Passing through." Something like that. Martha nodded slowly, her eyes moving past Catherine to the interior of the cabin, where the partially dismantled wedding dress was visible on the table. Her expression changed, sudden understanding dawning. "You're the bride, aren't you? The one who ran from her wedding yesterday in Sonora." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. Martha held up a hand. "No need to explain to me, dear. Word travels fast in these parts, especially news that juicy. Half the county's talking about the Wilson girl who left Harold Blackburn standing at the altar." Catherine's shoulders sagged. "Then you know who I am." "Catherine Wilson," Martha confirmed. "And judging by your presence here, I'm guessing Yancey had something to do with your dramatic escape." "He helped me," Catherine admitted, seeing no point in lying. "He gave me his coat and his horse when I had nowhere to go." "He's been a perfect gentleman." Martha's expression softened. "That sounds like Yancey. He's got a soft spot for strays and lost causes." She glanced at the wedding dress again. "Though I must say, you're the prettiest stray he's taken in yet." Catherine felt herself blushing. "I won't be staying long. Just until I can figure out what to do next." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "Well, if anyone comes asking, I haven't seen you. The Blackburns have never done my family any favors, and that son of theirs has a reputation that makes me glad I have sons and not daughters." She turned to go, then paused. "If you need anything women's clothes, advice, or just a friendly ear, our place is just over that rise to the west, the house with the red barn." "Thank you," Catherine said, surprised and touched by the unexpected support. "That's very kind." "Us women need to stick together out here," Martha said simply. "Life in the West isn't easy, especially for those of us who weren't born to it." After Martha left, Catherine returned to her work on the wedding dress, her mind spinning with this new development. Word of her escape had spread throughout the county. Everyone knew who she was and what she had done. Her chances of anonymously settling somewhere nearby had just diminished considerably. Yancey returned in the late afternoon, his shirt dirty from his work and sweat dampening his hair. He noticed the basket on the table immediately. Martha Johnson stopped by, Catherine explained before he could ask. She brought bread and preserves to thank you for helping with some strays. Ah, that was nice of her, Yancey said, pouring water from the pitcher into a basin to wash his hands and face. Did she say anything else? Catherine nodded grimly. She recognized me. Apparently, my scandalous behavior is the talk of the county. Yancey dried his face on a towel, his expression concerned. Did she seem like she would tell anyone? No, Catherine assured him. In fact, she offered her help if I needed it. She doesn't seem fond of the Blackburns. Few people are once they've had dealings with them, Yancey commented. Harold's father foreclosed on the Johnsons' neighbors last year, a family that had fallen on hard times after the father was injured in a mining accident. The Blackburns could have extended the loan, given them time to recover, but instead they took the land and sold it to a corporate mining interest from San Francisco. Catherine felt a chill. That could have been my family's fate without my marriage to Harold. Likely so, Yancey agreed. He looked at the dismantled wedding dress on the table. What are you doing with that? Salvaging what I can, Catherine explained. The dress is ruined, but the fabric is good. I thought I might be able to make something more practical. A blouse, perhaps, or a shawl. Yancey nodded approvingly. Resourceful. You might do all right out here after all, Miss Wilson. There was something in his tone, a hint of admiration, perhaps that warmed Catherine from within. In her previous life, she had been praised for her beauty, her musical ability, her graceful dancing. But never for practical skills or resourcefulness. I'm trying, she said simply. That evening they shared a meal of beans and fresh bread with Martha's preserves. The food was simple but satisfying. As darkness fell outside, Yancey lit a lamp and stoked the fire. The cabin felt cozy and safe. The outside world and its complications temporarily held at bay. Tell me about your land, Catherine said as they sat by the fire. How long have you been here? Yancey leaned back in his chair, stretching his long legs toward the hearth. I bought this plot 8 months ago. 20 acres, most of it wooded. There's good pasture for a few head of cattle or horses, and the creek never runs dry, even in summer. What made you choose this place? After years of moving around, what made you want to settle? Yancey was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine feared she had asked something too personal. But then he spoke, his voice soft with memory. I was working a cattle drive-up in Montana about a year ago. Got caught in an early blizzard high in the mountains. Lost 3 men and nearly 100 head of cattle. He stared into the flames. I nearly didn't make it myself. Found shelter in an abandoned mine shaft, huddled there for 2 days until the storm passed. He paused, taking a sip from his coffee cup. When I finally made it back to the nearest town, I realized something. I was 30 years old and had nothing to show for my life but scars and stories. No home, no family, nothing permanent. His blue eyes met hers across the fire. I decided it was time to put down roots. Came to California because I'd always liked the climate, found this place and knew it was right. And now you're building a life here, Catherine said. It's admirable. Yancey shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable with the praise. It's just living, same as anyone else. Not the same, Catherine disagreed. You chose your path. You made your own way. That takes courage and determination. So does running from your own wedding, Yancey pointed out with a small smile. Especially in those impractical shoes you were wearing. Catherine laughed, surprised by the sound. When was the last time she had genuinely laughed? She couldn't remember. Those slippers were dyed to match the dress, she said. Completely useless for anything but walking serenely down an aisle. And yet you ran like a deer through the streets of Sonora in them. Impressive. Fear is a powerful motivator, Catherine admitted, her smile fading. When I realized what my life would be with Harold, a possession, a trophy, a means to an end I couldn't breathe, I just knew I had to get away. Yancey nodded slowly. I understand that feeling, the need to breathe freely. They fell silent, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the cabin. Outside, an owl hooted softly, and the wind whispered through the pine needles. It was a peaceful sound, so different from the constant bustle and noise of town. I should let you get some rest, Yancey said finally, rising from his chair. Another long day tomorrow. You don't have to sleep in the lean-to again, Catherine said impulsively. It's your home. I can make a pallet on the floor. Yancey shook his head firmly. My mother raised me better than that. A gentleman doesn't let a lady sleep on the floor while he takes the bed. Your mother would also probably say a gentleman doesn't invite an unchaperoned woman to stay in his cabin, Catherine pointed out with a raised eyebrow. That surprised a laugh out of Yancey. True enough. But since I've already failed that test of gentlemanly behavior, I might as well maintain my standards in other areas. He collected his blanket and pillow, bid her good night, and headed for the door. Catherine watched him go, feeling a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly. Respect for his integrity. But there was something else too, a flutter in her chest when he smiled, a warmth when their eyes met that had nothing to do with the fire. It was dangerous, she knew. She was vulnerable, emotionally raw from her dramatic escape and the upending of her entire life. Yancey was kind and handsome and had come to her rescue like a knight in a fairy tale. It would be all too easy to transfer her gratitude into something more, to mistake safety for attraction. But as she lay in Yancey's bed that night, breathing in the faint scent of him that lingered on the pillow, Catherine had to admit to herself that what she was feeling wasn't just gratitude. There was a genuine spark there, a connection she had never felt with Harold or any of her previous suitors. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She had just escaped one entanglement. The last thing she should be doing was contemplating another. Besides, what could she possibly offer a man like Yancey Yates? She was practically penniless, scandalous by reputation, and utterly unprepared for life in the rugged West. Catherine turned her face into the pillow, willing herself to sleep and to stop these dangerous thoughts. Tomorrow she would focus on practical matters, figuring out her next steps, planning how to support herself, deciding where to go. There was no room in her new life for romantic fantasies, especially about a cowboy who had simply shown kindness to a woman in distress. That's all it was, she told herself firmly as sleep finally began to claim her. Simple kindness, nothing more. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with a hint of frost on the ground that melted quickly as the sun rose higher. Catherine woke early, determined to be useful. By the time Yancey came in from tending to Thunderbolt, she had the fire burning brightly and breakfast nearly ready. "You're up early," he commented, washing his hands in the basin. "I thought I should earn my keep," Catherine replied, setting a plate of fried potatoes and eggs on the table. "It's the least I can do." Yancey sat down, eyeing the food appreciatively. "You don't need to earn your keep. You're not a hired hand." "No, but I'm not a helpless damsel either," Catherine said firmly, sitting across from him. "I may have been raised to be decorative rather than useful, but I can learn." Yancey studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. What do you want to learn?" The question caught Catherine off guard. She had expected him to dismiss her offer or to assign her simple household tasks. Instead, he was asking for her input, treating her as if her preferences mattered. "Everything," she said after a moment's thought. "How to really cook, not just the basics. How to care for animals. How to garden. How to—" She gestured vaguely. How to live out here. Yancey's eyebrows rose slightly. Planning to stay in these parts, are you? Catherine flushed. No, I mean I don't know where I'll end up, but wherever it is, I want to be able to take care of myself. I never want to be dependent on someone else's goodwill again. Something in Yancey's expression softened. I understand. He took a bite of the potatoes. These are good. You already know more than you think. Beginner's luck, Catherine said, but she couldn't help feeling pleased by the compliment. After breakfast, Yancey surprised her by saying, "Get your boots on. I'm going to check the trap lines and you're coming with me." Trap lines? I set snares for rabbits, he explained. Help supplement the food supplies. It's a useful skill to know if you're ever in a pinch. Catherine hesitated. I don't know if I can. Kill an animal, Yancey finished for her. You don't have to, just watch this time. But out here, being squeamish about where food comes from is a luxury most can't afford. Catherine nodded, seeing the wisdom in his words. She put on her borrowed boots, which were far too big and had to be stuffed with rags to keep them from falling off, and followed Yancey outside. The morning air was crisp and fragrant with pine. The sun filtered through the trees in dappled patterns, and birds called to one another overhead. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that the carefully manicured gardens of Sonora could never match. Yancey moved through the forest with quiet confidence, pointing out plants and animal signs to Catherine as they walked. He showed her how to identify deer tracks, how to tell which berries were safe to eat, how to gauge the weather by the behavior of birds and insects. You know so much, Catherine said, impressed. Where did you learn all this? Here and there, Yancey replied. Worked with an old trapper in Wyoming for a while. Spent some time with a Shoshone hunting party in Idaho when I was injured and they took me in. Picked things up from other cowboys, ranchers, even a professor of natural history I met on a cattle drive once. They came to a small clearing where Yancey had set a snare. A rabbit had been caught overnight. Catherine steeled herself, expecting gore, but the animal had died quickly and cleanly. Good eating tonight, Yancey said matter-of-factly as he reset the trap. You'll get used to it. Everyone does, when hunger is the alternative. They checked 3 more traps, finding 1 empty and 2 more with rabbits. Yancey showed Catherine how to properly carry the game and how to set and reset the snares. His teaching style was patient and straightforward, never condescending or impatient when she didn't understand something immediately. On the way back to the cabin, they stopped by a small spring where watercress grew in abundance. Yancey showed Catherine how to harvest it without disturbing the roots so it would continue to grow. Fresh greens are hard to come by in winter, he explained. It's good to know where to find them. By the time they returned to the cabin, Catherine's borrowed boots had rubbed blisters on her heels, but she didn't complain. The morning had been educational in ways that her finishing school in San Francisco never had been, and she felt a sense of accomplishment that was entirely new. You're a quick learner, Yancey commented as he showed her how to clean the rabbits. This was the part Catherine had been dreading, but she forced herself to watch carefully, knowing it was an essential skill. I've always been good at learning, she said, trying not to wince as he demonstrated how to remove the skin. I just never had the opportunity to learn practical things before. Yancey glanced at her. What did you learn in that fancy school your kind goes to? Music, art, literature, French, deportment, dancing, Catherine recited. How to pour tea correctly, how to make polite conversation about absolutely nothing, how to walk with a book on my head. Yancey's mouth quirked. Useful skills for impressing potential husbands, I suppose. That was the entire point, Catherine agreed. We weren't being educated to be independent or to think for ourselves. We were being trained to be suitable wives for successful men. And yet here you are, learning to skin rabbits instead. Catherine smiled wryly. Life takes unexpected turns. That afternoon, after the rabbits had been prepared and set to stew slowly over the fire, Yancey showed Catherine how to use a knife to whittle a skill she had never imagined she would learn. Her first attempt at carving a simple whistle was clumsy, but Yancey praised her effort nonetheless. "You've got steady hands," he said. "That's the main thing. The rest comes with practice." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in dramatic shades of orange and purple, they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the colors change. Catherine had found a rhythm to her whittling now, and the repetitive motion was almost meditative. "I need to go into town tomorrow," Yancey said after a long, comfortable silence. "We're running low on flour and coffee, and I need to pick up some nails for the new fence section." Catherine tensed. "Is that safe? What if someone asks about me?" "No one will connect me to your disappearance," Yancey assured her. "I'm just a cowboy who was passing through Sonora that day. Besides, I need to show my face around town occasionally or people will start to wonder where I've gone." "You could be recognized as the man who was there when I disappeared," Catherine pointed out. "The man whose horse is now mysteriously missing." "I'll say I sold my horse to a traveler heading north," Yancey said with a shrug. "It's believable enough." "And I'll ride the old mare I bought from the Johnsons last month. No one in Sonora has seen her." Catherine nodded, though she still felt uneasy. "Be careful." "Always am," Yancey replied with a small smile. "Will you be all right here alone for the day?" "I'll be fine," Catherine assured him. "I've got plenty to keep me busy." That evening they enjoyed the rabbit stew, which was rich and flavorful with the addition of the watercress, and some wild onions Yancey had found. As they ate, Catherine found herself watching Yancey's hands, strong, capable hands that could break a horse, build a fence, or gently demonstrate how to carve a whistle. They were so different from Harold Blackburn's soft, manicured hands that had never known a day's hard labor. "What are you thinking about so intently over there?" Yancey asked, breaking into her thoughts. Catherine blinked, embarrassed at being caught staring. "I was just thinking about how different this is from the life I would have had if I'd gone through with the wedding. Better or worse?" "Different," Catherine said thoughtfully. "Harder in many ways, but also freer, more honest." She looked around the simple cabin. "There's something to be said for a life built with your own hands." Yancey nodded slowly. "It's not an easy life, but it's a real one." He hesitated, then added, "Though I'm not sure it's a life many women would choose voluntarily." "Perhaps more would if they were given the choice," Catherine suggested. "Women are stronger than men often give them credit for." "I don't doubt your strength, Miss Wilson," Yancey said with a hint of a smile. "Anyone who can run through town in a wedding dress and those ridiculous slippers has plenty of courage." Catherine laughed, and Yancey joined her, the sound filling the small cabin with unexpected warmth. It struck Catherine that in just 2 days, she had laughed more with this man than she had in months with Harold. There was an ease between them, a natural rapport that had developed surprisingly quickly. After dinner, as had become their routine, Yancey prepared to head out to the lean-to for the night. Tonight, however, Catherine felt a strange reluctance to see him go. "Thank you," she said suddenly as he reached for the door. Yancey turned. "For what?" "For everything. For helping me escape. For teaching me things no one else ever bothered to teach me. For treating me like a person with a mind of my own, not just a decoration or a business transaction." Yancey looked slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You'd have managed without me." "Perhaps," Catherine conceded. "But I'm glad I didn't have to." Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the connection that was forming. It should have frightened Catherine, this growing attachment to a man she barely knew. Instead, it filled her with a quiet certainty that felt entirely different from the anxious resignation she had felt about her engagement to Harold. Yancey cleared his throat and broke the moment. "Get some rest. I'll be leaving early for town." After he had gone, Catherine sat by the fire, finishing her work on the whistle he had taught her to carve. When she finally blew into it and produced a clear, sharp note, she felt a disproportionate sense of pride in the small achievement. That night, as she lay in Yancey's bed, Catherine made a decision. She would not simply wait for him to return tomorrow. She would use the time alone to prove to herself and to him that she could be useful, resourceful, and strong. She would show him that she wasn't just a burden he had taken on out of kindness, but a woman capable of building her own life, whatever form that might take. With that resolution firmly in mind, Catherine drifted off to sleep, dreaming not of fancy ballrooms or elegant parlors, but of open skies and endless possibilities. The morning of Yancey's trip to town dawned bright and clear. Catherine rose early, determined to make good use of her day alone. She prepared a simple breakfast and packed a small lunch for Yancey to take with him. "You didn't have to do that," he said when she handed him the bundle wrapped in a cloth. "I wanted to," Catherine replied simply. "Be careful in town." Yancey nodded, adjusting his hat. "Keep the rifle close, just in case. I don't expect any trouble, but it's better to be prepared." After he had ridden off on Martha Johnson's old mare, Catherine surveyed the cabin, mentally listing the tasks she could accomplish. She would clean thoroughly, organize the pantry shelves, finish converting part of her wedding dress into something useful, and perhaps even try to prepare a special meal for Yancey's return. She set to work with determination, sweeping and scrubbing the floors, dusting the shelves, and organizing Yancey's modest collection of books. It was satisfying work, different from the superficial cleaning she had been taught was appropriate for a lady to oversee but never actually do. By midday, the cabin was spotless, and Catherine had made significant progress on transforming part of her wedding dress into a practical shawl. She was contemplating what to prepare for dinner when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Her heart raced with sudden fear. Yancey wouldn't be back so soon, and he was riding alone. Grabbing the rifle as he had instructed, Catherine moved to the window, peering cautiously outside. 3 riders were approaching the cabin, 2 men and a woman. With a surge of relief, Catherine recognized Martha Johnson. The men must be her husband and son. Setting the rifle aside, Catherine smoothed her borrowed clothes and went to the door, stepping out onto the porch as the riders approached. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Johnson," she called, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Martha reined in her mare and dismounted with the ease of a woman who had been riding all her life. "Catherine, I thought I'd find you here. This is my husband, Thomas, and my son, Frederick." The 2 men tipped their hats politely, though Frederick, a young man of perhaps 20, eyed her with open curiosity. "Yancey's gone to town," Catherine explained. "He should be back by evening." "We know," Martha said. "We saw him on the road and told him we'd stop by to check on you. I've brought you some proper clothes." She gestured to a bundle tied to her saddle. "Can't have you wearing Yancey's things forever, though I must say you make them look better than he does." Catherine flushed, both grateful and embarrassed. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Johnson. Martha, please. And it's no trouble. These belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Sacramento. You 2 look to be about the same size." Thomas Johnson, a tall man with weathered features and kind eyes, spoke up. "We also wanted to let you know that Blackburn's men were asking questions at our place yesterday." Catherine's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "About any strangers in the area, particularly a young woman traveling alone," Thomas said grimly. They're offering a reward for information on your whereabouts. A reward, Catherine whispered, shocked. But why? Surely Harold wouldn't still want to marry me after what I did. It's not about marriage anymore, Martha said, her expression serious. It's about pride. The Blackburns don't take humiliation well. Frederick, who had been silent until now, added, There are rumors that old man Blackburn is threatening to foreclose on anyone who helped you or is hiding you. Catherine felt sick. So I've not only ruined my own life but potentially the lives of anyone who shows me kindness. Nonsense, Martha said firmly. The Blackburns have been throwing their weight around for years. It's about time someone stood up to them. But your ranch is paid for, Thomas interrupted. We own our land free and clear, which is more than most can say around here. The Blackburns have no hold over us. Still, Catherine said, I can't stay here and put Yancey at risk. He's just starting to build his life here. I won't be the reason he loses everything. Martha and Thomas exchanged a look. Yancey can take care of himself, Thomas said. He's tougher than he looks. That may be, but it's not right for me to bring trouble to his door, Catherine insisted. I should move on. Martha sighed. At least wait until Yancey returns. Talk to him about it. And in the meantime, try on these clothes. You'll feel better in something that fits properly. After the Johnsons left, promising to keep an eye out for any suspicious visitors in the area, Catherine carried the bundle of clothes inside. Martha had been incredibly generous, providing 2 simple dresses, a riding skirt, several blouses, undergarments, and even a pair of boots that looked to be about her size. Catherine tried on one of the dresses, a practical garment of blue cotton with a fitted bodice and full skirt. It was plain compared to the elaborate gowns she was used to wearing, but it fit well and allowed for ease of movement. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror Yancey kept for shaving, Catherine hardly recognized herself. The woman who looked back at her wasn't the pampered daughter of a once wealthy mine investor, but someone stronger, more capable, someone who might actually belong in this rugged country. Despite the comfort of having proper clothes again, Catherine couldn't shake her worry about bringing danger to Yancey's doorstep. The Blackburns were powerful and vindictive. If they discovered that Yancey had helped her escape, they could make life very difficult for him. As she continued working on converting her wedding dress into a shawl, Catherine's mind raced with possibilities. She could leave before Yancey returned, sparing him the need to choose between his own safety and helping her further. She could make her way to the nearest stagecoach stop and head east, perhaps to Nevada or even farther. But the thought of leaving without saying goodbye, of never seeing Yancey again, filled her with an unexpected ache. In just a few days, this quiet cowboy with his gentle strength and patient teaching had come to mean something to her. Something important. Catherine was still wrestling with these thoughts when she heard a single horse approaching in the late afternoon. Moving to the window, she saw Yancey returning, his saddlebags full and his expression grim. She hurried outside to meet him. "What's wrong? Did something happen in town?" Yancey dismounted, his movements stiff with tension. "The Blackburns have hired a bounty hunter to find you." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. "A bounty hunter? For a runaway bride? Harold is claiming you stole family jewelry," Yancey said, leading his horse to the lean-to. "It's a lie, of course, but it gives them legal justification to pursue you." "I didn't take anything," Catherine protested. "Just the clothes on my back which I ruined in the escape." "I know that," Yancey said, his voice gentler. "But the Blackburns are powerful in these parts and they've got the sheriff in their pocket. The truth doesn't matter much to them." He noticed her changed appearance. "The Johnsons stopped by," Catherine nodded. "Martha brought me some clothes. They also told me about the reward being offered for information about me." She hesitated. Yancey, I can't stay here. I'm putting you in danger. Yancey finished unsaddling the horse before responding. Let's talk inside. In the cabin, Yancey set down his purchases: flour, coffee, sugar, and other supplies before turning to face Catherine. I'm not afraid of the Blackburns, he said plainly. Or their hired guns. You should be, Catherine insisted. They have money and influence. They could make it impossible for you to stay here to build the life you want. Yancey's jaw tightened. I don't take kindly to being threatened, Catherine. Never have. This isn't about your pride, Catherine said, frustration creeping into her voice. It's about your future. Everything you've worked for. I won't be responsible for you losing it all because of me. That's my decision to make, isn't it? Yancey countered. I chose to help you. I knew there might be consequences. But you couldn't have known it would go this far, Catherine argued. A bounty hunter. False accusations of theft. This is beyond what anyone could have anticipated. Yancey sighed, running a hand through his hair. What would you do? Where would you go? East, maybe. Nevada or Utah. Somewhere the Blackburns' influence doesn't reach. Catherine wrapped her arms around herself. I could find work as a teacher or a companion to an elderly person. I'd manage. Alone. In territory you don't know, with people who might be no better than the Blackburns. I don't have much choice, Catherine said softly. I won't endanger the few people who have shown me kindness. Yancey was quiet for a long moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he said something that took her completely by surprise. Come with me. Catherine blinked. What? Come with me, he repeated. I have a friend in Northern California near the Oregon border. He owns a large cattle ranch and has been asking me to come work for him for years. We could go there, both of us. The Blackburns would never find you. You would leave. Catherine stared at him in disbelief. Leave your land, your home, everything you've built here, Yancey shrugged. Land can be bought elsewhere. A home can be rebuilt. His blue eyes held her steadily. Some things are worth starting over for. The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Catherine felt her heart beating faster. You hardly know me. I know enough, Yancey said simply. I know you're brave. I know you're willing to learn. I know you laugh at my poor jokes and cook a decent meal and aren't afraid to get your hands dirty. His mouth quirked in a half-smile. And I know I haven't enjoyed anyone's company this much in a very long time. Catherine felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. Yancey. A sudden pounding on the door interrupted her. Yates. Open up in the name of the law. Yancey's expression hardened. He moved swiftly to the rifle, checking that it was loaded. Get behind me, he said in a low voice. Catherine obeyed, fear coursing through her. Who is it? Sheriff Davis from Sonora, most likely, Yancey murmured. With Blackburn's money behind him. He raised his voice. What's your business, Sheriff? I have a warrant to search these premises for Catherine Wilson, wanted for theft of valuable property from the Blackburn family, came the reply. Open up, or we'll break down the door. Yancey glanced at Catherine. Is there anything of yours visible? Anything that would prove you've been here? Catherine looked around frantically. Her wedding dress. It was still on the table, partially transformed into a shawl. She grabbed it and looked for somewhere to hide it. Under the bed, Yancey whispered, nodding toward the piece of furniture. Catherine quickly stuffed the white satin under the bed while Yancey moved to the door. I'm opening up, Sheriff. No need for property damage. He unbolted the door and swung it open, keeping the rifle casually at his side. Sheriff Davis stood on the porch, flanked by 2 deputies. Behind them, sitting astride an expensive-looking black horse, was Harold Blackburn himself, his thin face set in lines of smug anticipation. Mr. Yates, the sheriff said, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. We have reason to believe you're harboring Catherine Wilson, a fugitive from justice." "Is that so?" Yancey's voice was calm. "And what makes you think that?" "You were seen in town the day she disappeared," one of the deputies offered. "And your horse matches the description of the one she was seen riding away on." "I sold my chestnut stallion to a traveler heading north that day," Yancey said, repeating the story he had prepared. "Got a good price for him, too. As for being in town, so were half the county's residents." "There was a wedding, I hear." Harold Blackburn urged his horse forward. "We know she's here, Cowboy. The Johnson boy was seen bringing women's clothing to this cabin earlier today." Yancey's expression didn't change. "Martha Johnson brought some clothes for me to pass along to the widow Carson, whose house burned down last week. I'll be taking them to her tomorrow." Catherine, listening from inside, marveled at Yancey's composure and quick thinking. "We'll need to search the premises," the sheriff insisted. "You have a warrant?" Yancey asked. The sheriff produced a piece of paper. Yancey took it, made a show of examining it, then stepped aside. "Look all you want, Sheriff, but I don't appreciate being accused of harboring criminals. I'm a law-abiding citizen." Catherine's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the wall beside the fireplace, trying to make herself as small as possible. The sheriff and one deputy entered the cabin while the other remained outside with Harold. "Check under the bed, Jenkins," the sheriff ordered, glancing around the small space. Catherine held her breath as the deputy dropped to his knees and peered under the bed. Would he find the wedding dress? "Nothing but dust bunnies, Sheriff," Jenkins reported, standing back up. The sheriff opened the trunk, rifled through Yancey's clothes, and checked the pantry shelves. "No sign of a woman staying here," he admitted reluctantly. "But that doesn't mean she wasn't here and moved on." "I haven't seen Catherine Wilson," Yancey said firmly. "Wouldn't know her if I saw her." "Now, if you're done trampling through my home and insulting my integrity, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave. I've got dinner to prepare." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. "For now, Yates, but we'll be keeping an eye on this place." Blackburn's offering a substantial reward for information leading to his fiancée's return. "Ex-fiancée," Yancey corrected. "From what I hear, she made her feelings pretty clear by running out on the wedding." Harold Blackburn's face darkened with anger. "You do well to watch your tone, Cowboy. Men who cross the Blackburn family tend to regret it." Yancey didn't respond to the threat, simply standing in the doorway until the sheriff, his deputies, and Harold had mounted up and ridden away. Only when they were out of sight did he close the door and turn to Catherine with a grim expression. "They'll be back," he said, "and next time they might not be so easily satisfied." Catherine emerged from her hiding spot, trembling slightly. "They didn't find my dress." "Lucky break," Yancey agreed. "But Harold's right, the Johnsons' visit today will raise suspicion. We need to move quickly." "You still want to leave?" Catherine asked. "Even after they've connected you to me, especially after that," Yancey said. "It's only a matter of time before someone talks or they find real evidence. We should leave tonight." "Tonight," Catherine repeated, surprised by the urgency. "But what about your things, your land?" "I'll take what I can carry," Yancey said, already moving around the cabin, gathering essentials. "The land? Well, I'll have to write to a lawyer in Sacramento about selling it. For now, it'll have to wait." Catherine watched him work, feeling a mixture of guilt and amazement. This man, who had barely known her for 3 days, was willing to upend his entire life to help her escape from the Blackburns' vengeance. "Yancey," she said softly, "you don't have to do this. This is your home." He paused in his packing and looked at her, his blue eyes serious. "Home isn't just a place, Catherine. It's a feeling, a sense of rightness." He hesitated, then added, "I've felt more at home these past few days with you here than in all the months I've owned this land." Catherine's breath caught. There it was an acknowledgement of the connection between them, a connection that had grown with surprising speed and intensity. "I feel it too," she admitted. "This sense of belonging. It's nothing like what I felt with Harold or any of the men my parents wanted me to marry." Yancey crossed the room to stand before her. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he raised a hand to her cheek. "Then let's go together. Start fresh somewhere the Blackburns can't reach us." Catherine leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the warmth of his hand against her skin. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's go together." The decision made, they worked with focused efficiency, packing only what was essential. Food, clothing, Yancey's tools, the money he had saved, and a few personal items. Catherine carefully folded the clothes Martha had given her, along with the partially completed shawl made from her wedding dress, a reminder of what she had left behind, and the freedom she had chosen instead. Night had fallen by the time they were ready to leave. Yancey had saddled both Thunderbolt, who had returned with Catherine, and the old mare he had ridden to town. Their supplies were distributed between the two horses, with room for the riders. "The sheriff will probably have men watching the main trails," Yancey said as they prepared to depart. "We'll take the old mining path through the foothills. It's rougher terrain, but less likely to be patrolled." Catherine nodded, pulling on Martha's spare riding jacket. The night was clear but cold, stars glittering overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Despite the danger and uncertainty ahead, she felt a curious sense of peace. For the first time in her life, she was making her own choices, following a path that felt right rather than one that had been prescribed for her. Yancey took one last look at the cabin, the home he had built with his own hands, the first place that had truly been his. Then he turned away, helping Catherine mount Thunderbolt before swinging up onto the mare's back. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low in the darkness. Catherine looked at him, this man who had given her his coat, his horse, and now his future, all because she had needed help and he had been unable to turn away. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. "Ready," she said, and they rode into the night, leaving behind the past and heading toward a future of their own making. The journey north was arduous but exhilarating. Yancey led them through winding mountain paths, across fast-flowing streams, and through dense forests, always careful to avoid main roads and settlements where news of the runaway bride and the reward for her capture might have spread. They traveled primarily at night for the first few days, resting during daylight hours in hidden, defensible locations Yancey scouted carefully. Despite the discomfort and the constant vigilance, Catherine found herself enjoying the journey. There was a freedom in movement, in the knowledge that each mile put more distance between them and the Blackburns' influence. During their rest periods, Yancey continued Catherine's education in wilderness survival. He taught her how to build a fire that produced minimal smoke, how to identify edible plants, and how to orient herself using the sun and stars. Catherine proved an eager student, determined to be a partner rather than a burden. "You're a natural at this," Yancey commented one evening as Catherine successfully started a fire with flint and steel on her first try. "Most city folks struggle with the basics for weeks." Catherine smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I have a good teacher, and plenty of motivation to learn." On the 5th day of their journey, they finally felt safe enough to travel during daylight hours. The landscape had changed, the rolling foothills giving way to more densely forested mountains. The air was cooler here, tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth. "We're near the border of Shasta County," Yancey told her as they rode side by side along a narrow trail. "Another week's journey should bring us to Henry Garrison's ranch." "Tell me about your friend," Catherine said, curious about the man who might offer them sanctuary. Yancey's expression softened with memory. "Henry and I worked together on cattle drives out of Texas when we were both younger. He saved my life once when a river crossing went bad, dragged me out of the water when my horse got swept away." He adjusted his hat against the sun filtering through the trees. "About 5 years ago, he inherited land from an uncle up near the Oregon border, built it into one of the most successful cattle operations in Northern California. And you think he'll help us?" "Without question," Yancey said with confidence. "Henry's not the kind of man who forgets a friend. He's been trying to convince me to come work for him for years. Says he needs someone who knows horses to manage his breeding program." "It sounds perfect," Catherine said, trying to picture the ranch and their life there. Yancey glanced at her. "It won't be easy. Ranch life is demanding, especially for women. Long hours, hard work, isolation." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Catherine assured him. "And after nearly marrying Harold Blackburn, a little isolation sounds appealing." Yancey chuckled. "Fair enough." That evening, they made camp near a small lake nestled in a valley between two mountains. The setting was breathtakingly beautiful, the still water reflecting the sunset in ribbons of gold, pink, and purple. After setting up camp and ensuring the horses were properly tethered, Yancey announced he would try to catch fish for their dinner. Catherine sat on a fallen log at the edge of the lake, watching as Yancey waded in with a makeshift spear he had fashioned from a straight branch. There was something mesmerizing about his focused concentration, the patient stillness followed by swift, precise movement as he spotted a fish. After successfully catching 3 good-sized trout, Yancey returned to shore, his pant legs wet to the knees. "Dinner," he said simply, displaying his catch with quiet pride. Together they cleaned the fish and set them to cook over the fire. The domestic routine they had established felt comfortable, natural, as if they had been traveling companions for years, rather than days. As they ate the perfectly cooked fish, Catherine found herself studying Yancey's profile in the firelight. The strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the quiet confidence in his movements. Everything about him spoke of strength and reliability, yet there was a gentleness to him as well as a thoughtfulness that set him apart from the rough cowboys she had occasionally encountered in Sonora. "You're staring," Yancey said without looking at her, a hint of amusement in his voice. Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "I was just thinking about how different this is from what my life would have been with Harold." Yancey turned to face her then, his blue eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Better or worse?" "Better," Catherine said without hesitation. "With Harold, I would have had material comfort, but at the cost of my freedom, my voice, myself." She gestured to their simple camp. "This may lack luxury, but I've never felt more alive or more true to myself." Yancey's expression softened. "You're a remarkable woman, Catherine Wilson. Most ladies of your background would be complaining about the lack of proper beds and indoor plumbing by now." "Perhaps I was never meant for that life," Catherine suggested. "Perhaps I was always meant for—" She hesitated, then finished softly, "for this, for adventure, for making my own way." "For running away with a cowboy," Yancey added, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Catherine laughed. "That wasn't in my finishing school curriculum, I'll admit, but yes, perhaps for that too." Their eyes held across the fire, and Catherine felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. The connection between them had grown stronger with each passing day, nurtured by shared challenges and quiet moments of understanding. It wasn't the superficial attraction she had sometimes felt for handsome young men at Sonora's social gatherings, nor was it the dutiful affection she had tried to manufacture for Harold. This was deeper, more fundamental a recognition of something essential in each other. Yancey broke the gaze first, clearing his throat. "We should get some rest. Long day tomorrow." Catherine nodded, though a part of her wished the moment could have continued. They had not yet discussed what their relationship might be once they reached Henry Garrison's ranch. Would they simply be fellow workers, friends, or something more? The question lingered in her mind as she prepared for sleep, arranging her bedroll near the fire but with a respectful distance from Yancey's. Despite their growing closeness, he had maintained a gentlemanly reserve, never presuming or pushing for more than Catherine was ready to give. That night, as the fire burned down to embers and the stars wheeled overhead, Catherine lay awake, listening to the gentle sounds of the wilderness, the soft hooting of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a pampered existence in Sonora to sleeping under the stars with a man who had become more important to her than she could have imagined possible just a week ago. What would her parents think if they could see her now? Her mother would be horrified, certainly camping in the wilderness, wearing practical clothes, traveling unchaperoned with a man she barely knew. Her father might be less scandalized. He had been an adventurer in his younger days, before the responsibilities of family and business had settled on his shoulders. Perhaps he would understand something of the freedom Catherine had found. Across the fire, Yancey shifted in his sleep, murmuring something indistinct. Catherine smiled into the darkness, feeling a surge of affection for this quiet, steady man who had risked everything to help her. Whatever the future held at Henry Garrison's ranch, Catherine was certain of one thing. Her life had changed irrevocably the moment she had fled from the church in Sonora, and she couldn't bring herself to regret a single step of the journey that had followed. 3 more days of travel brought them to the outskirts of a small town nestled in a valley. Yancey suggested they stop to resupply, as their food stocks were running low. Catherine felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of entering a settlement, even one as remote as this. "What if someone recognizes me?" she asked as they approached the town's main street. "Unlikely," Yancey assured her. "We're far from Sonora now, and news travels slowly in these parts, especially with winter coming on." He studied her for a moment. "Still, best to be cautious. Keep your hat pulled low and let me do the talking." The town, which Yancey identified as Mill Creek, consisted of one main street lined with the usual frontier establishments: a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a small hotel. A few houses were scattered on the outskirts, with what appeared to be a schoolhouse at the far end of town. They tied their horses outside the general store, and Yancey helped Catherine dismount. Her muscles were sore from days in the saddle, but she had grown accustomed to the discomfort. She adjusted her hat, pulling the brim low as Yancey had suggested. Inside the store, an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose greeted them with mild curiosity. "Don't get many strangers this time of year," he commented. "Roads get treacherous with the first snows." "Just passing through," Yancey said easily. "Heading up to Garrison's ranch. I'm the new horse manager." "Ah, Henry Garrison," the shopkeeper nodded. "Good man, does a lot of business here when he brings his hands to town." His gaze shifted to Catherine. "And the lady?" Yancey hesitated for only a moment. "My wife, Catherine." Catherine fought to keep her expression neutral, though her heart had jumped at Yancey's words. His wife. It was a practical lie. Of course, a married couple traveling together would attract far less attention than an unmarried man and woman. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Yates," the shopkeeper said with a polite nod. "Likewise," Catherine managed, pitching her voice slightly lower than normal. They purchased the supplies they needed: flour, coffee, bacon, beans, and ammunition for Yancey's rifle. The shopkeeper chatted amiably as he measured and wrapped each item, sharing local news and inquiring about conditions further south. Yancey handled the conversation with ease, revealing nothing of importance while maintaining a friendly demeanor. Catherine marveled at his skill in navigating the exchange, giving the appearance of openness while actually saying very little. As they were preparing to leave, the door opened, and a man in a sheriff's uniform entered. Catherine felt Yancey tense beside her, though his expression remained neutral. "Afternoon, Sheriff," the shopkeeper called. "George," the sheriff nodded. "Just stopped by to see if that order of winter boots came in yet." "Due on tomorrow's stage, Sheriff. I'll set aside your pair." The sheriff noticed Yancey and Catherine then. "Afternoon, folks. Don't believe I've seen you before." "Just passing through," Yancey repeated his earlier explanation. "On our way to Garrison's ranch up north," the sheriff nodded. "Long ride, weather's turning. Might want to consider staying in town tonight rather than camping. First snow could come anytime now." "Appreciate the advice," Yancey said. "We'll consider it." Outside, once they were safely away from the store, Catherine whispered, "Do you think he suspected anything?" "No," Yancey said, loading their supplies into the saddlebags. "Just being friendly." Small town sheriffs make it their business to know everyone passing through. He glanced at the sky where gray clouds were gathering. "But he's right about the weather. Snow's coming. We should consider staying the night." Catherine looked at the small hotel dubiously. "Is it safe?" "Safer than getting caught in a snowstorm," Yancey pointed out. "And we're far enough from Sonora now that I doubt news of the runaway bride has reached this far." He hesitated, then added, "Though we should maintain the pretense we established in the store." "That I'm your wife," Catherine clarified, watching his face carefully. Yancey nodded, a hint of color rising in his tanned cheeks. "For appearance's sake." "Of course," Catherine agreed, ignoring the small thrill that ran through her at the thought. "For appearances." The hotel was modest but clean, with a small dining room on the first floor and guest rooms above. The proprietress, a plump woman with graying hair and quick, intelligent eyes, greeted them warmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Yates need a room for the night," Yancey explained, using the false identity he had established at the store. "We're traveling to Garrison's ranch." "Certainly," the woman said, producing a large key. "Room 3, top of the stairs. Dinner's served at 6, breakfast at 7. Baths extra but worth it after a long journey." "Thank you," Catherine said, suddenly aware of how travel-worn she must appear and smell. A bath sounded heavenly. Their room was simply furnished with a double bed, a washstand, a small table with a mirror above it, and a chest of drawers. A window overlooked the main street, and heavy curtains promised privacy. Catherine stood awkwardly just inside the door, acutely aware that this was the first time she and Yancey had shared such close quarters. During their journey, there had always been the open sky above them, the natural separation of their individual bedrolls. "I'll sleep on the floor," Yancey said immediately, sensing her discomfort. "You take the bed." "You don't have to do that," Catherine protested. "You've been sleeping on the ground for days. Your back must be killing you." "I'm used to it," Yancey assured her, setting down his saddlebags. "I've spent more nights under the stars than in proper beds." Catherine bit her lip, torn between propriety and practicality. "At least share the bed until nightfall," she suggested. "Rest properly before dinner, then you can move to the floor if you insist." Yancey hesitated, then nodded. "If you're sure." "I'm sure." While Yancey stretched out on one side of the bed, Catherine arranged for a bath to be prepared in the small bathing room at the end of the hall. The luxury of hot water and soap was almost overwhelming after days of makeshift washing in cold streams. She scrubbed every inch of her skin, washed her hair thoroughly, and emerged feeling renewed. Back in their room, she found Yancey awake and sitting in the chair by the window, watching the street below. He had washed up as well, his dark hair still damp, and had changed into his spare shirt. "Feel better?" he asked, looking up as she entered. "Like a new woman," Catherine admitted. "Your turn. The water's still hot." While Yancey went to bathe, Catherine took the opportunity to brush out her damp hair and examine her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her was different from the one who had fled Sonora in a torn wedding dress. Her face was tanned from days in the sun, with a spattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose that her mother had always insisted she cover with powder. Her eyes seemed brighter, more alive, and there was a confidence in her expression that had been lacking before. By the time Yancey returned, Catherine had braided her hair and changed into the cleanest of the clothes. Martha Johnson had given her a simple dress of green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Yancey stopped in the doorway, his gaze traveling over her with undisguised appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. It feels good to be clean again." They went down to dinner, where the dining room was occupied by only a few other guests, a traveling salesman, an elderly couple, and a young man who appeared to be a student or clerk of some kind. No one paid them much attention beyond polite nods. The meal was hearty frontier fare roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. After days of trail cooking, it was a feast. Catherine found herself relaxing as they ate, the worry of discovery fading in the warmth of the dining room and the comfort of Yancey's steady presence across the table. "Tell me more about Henry Garrison's ranch," she said as they lingered over coffee. "What will it be like?" Yancey leaned back in his chair, considering. "It's a big operation, several thousand acres, hundreds of cattle, maybe 40 or 50 hands depending on the season. The main house is substantial, 2 stories, built from local timber. There are bunkhouses for the single men and a few small cabins for married hands with families." He paused, watching her reaction. "It's remote but not isolated. There's a sense of community among the ranch families." "And what will we be?" Catherine asked softly. "To each other, I mean." "Once we're there." Yancey's blue eyes held hers for a long moment. "That would be for you to decide, Catherine." His voice was low, meant only for her. "I would never presume to define what exists between us without your consent." Catherine felt warmth spread through her at his words. Even now, with all they had been through together, Yancey was giving her the choice, the freedom to determine her own path. "And if I wanted us to be more than friends," she ventured, her heart pounding. Yancey's expression softened. "Then I would be the happiest man in California." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "But there's no rush, Catherine. We have time to let whatever this is between us grow naturally." Catherine turned her hand under his, threading their fingers together. "You are unlike any man I've ever known, Yancey Yates." "I'll take that as a compliment," he said with a small smile. It was meant as one. That night, despite Yancey's protests, Catherine insisted they share the bed. "We're both adults," she pointed out, "and we're both exhausted. The bed is large enough, and I trust you completely." Yancey reluctantly agreed, though he stayed resolutely on his side of the bed, careful not to touch her even accidentally. Catherine found his respectful consideration both endearing and, surprisingly, a little disappointing. As she drifted toward sleep, she found herself wondering what it might be like to be held by him, to feel the strength of his arms around her. Morning brought the season's first snow, just as the sheriff had predicted. Soft white flakes swirled outside the window, accumulating slowly on the ground below. "We should wait it out," Yancey decided, watching the weather with a practiced eye. If it stops by midday, we can still make good progress. The trail to Henry's ranch is challenging enough without adding snow to the equation. They spent the morning in their room, Catherine working on the shawl she was creating from her wedding dress while Yancey cleaned and oiled his rifle. They talked easily, sharing stories from their pasts, Yancey's adventures on cattle drives across the West, Catherine's experiences at finishing school in San Francisco. By noon, the snow had stopped, though a light dusting covered the ground. They decided to press on, knowing they were now just 3 days' ride from their destination if the weather held. The landscape after the snowfall was magical, a pristine white blanket draped over the hills, sparkling in the afternoon sun. Their horses' hooves crunched in the shallow snow as they made their way out of Mill Creek and back onto the trail heading north. "It's beautiful," Catherine breathed, taking in the transformed world around them. "Like riding through a Christmas card," Yancey agreed. "Though less picturesque if the snow gets deeper." They made good time that afternoon, the horses seeming energized by the cooler air. By evening, they had covered more ground than expected and made camp in the shelter of a rocky outcropping that offered protection from the wind. As they sat by the fire that night, Catherine felt a sense of anticipation building within her. They were nearing the end of their journey. Soon they would arrive at Henry Garrison's ranch and begin the next chapter of their lives. What would it be like? Would they find the safety and fresh start they sought? And what of the growing feelings between them? "Penny for your thoughts," Yancey said, noticing her contemplative expression. Catherine smiled. "I was just thinking about the future, about what awaits us at the ranch, having second thoughts." "No," she said firmly. "The opposite, actually. I'm eager to arrive, to start this new life." She hesitated, then added, "with you." Yancey's eyes reflected the firelight as he looked at her. "Catherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I need you to know something. When we reach Henry's ranch, you'll be free to make whatever choice feels right for you. If you decide this life, or a life with me, isn't what you want, I'll understand. I'll help you get wherever you want to go." Catherine was touched by his concern, by his continued determination to ensure her freedom of choice. "Yancey, I ran from a wedding because I refused to be with a man I didn't love, a man who saw me as property rather than a person." She moved closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Do you really think I would have come all this way with you if I didn't want to be here, if I didn't want to be with you?" Yancey swallowed hard, his composure slipping for perhaps the first time since she had known him. "I didn't want to assume. You've been through so much, made such dramatic changes in your life. I thought perhaps you needed time to be sure." "I am sure," Catherine said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "About this, about us." Yancey caught her hand, turning it to press a kiss to her palm. The gesture was tender, almost reverent. "I've been falling in love with you since the moment you came running through Sonora in that torn wedding dress," he admitted. "So brave, so determined. I knew then that you were something special." Catherine's heart soared at his words. "And I've been falling in love with you since you gave me your coat and your horse without a second thought, since you taught me to whittle and to set snares and to see beauty in this wild country." She leaned closer. "I love you, Yancey Yates." "Catherine," he breathed, and then his mouth was on hers, gentle at first, then with growing passion as she responded eagerly. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Catherine melted into the embrace, feeling as though she had finally come home. When they eventually broke apart, both breathing heavily, Yancey rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he whispered. "More than I thought possible." That night they slept in each other's arms beneath the vast canopy of stars, their shared body heat a shield against the cold. Nothing improper occurred. Yancey's respect for Catherine remained steadfast, but the simple intimacy of being held through the night was a profound experience for both of them. The next 2 days of travel passed in a state of heightened awareness, their newly acknowledged feelings adding a sweet undercurrent to every interaction. They rode side by side when the trail allowed, talked and laughed easily, and stole kisses during rest breaks. Catherine felt as though she were truly living for the first time, experiencing emotions and sensations that had been merely theoretical before. On the afternoon of the 3rd day after leaving Mill Creek, they crested a ridge and saw before them a broad valley, at the center of which stood a collection of buildings that could only be Henry Garrison's ranch. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and even from this distance, they could make out the movement of horses in corrals and cattle in nearby pastures. "There it is," Yancey said, reining in Thunderbolt. "Journey's End." Catherine took in the sight, a mixture of excitement and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "It's larger than I imagined." "Henry's done well for himself," Yancey agreed. "Built something to be proud of." He glanced at her. "Ready?" Catherine nodded, straightening her shoulders. "Ready." They rode down into the valley, following a well-maintained trail that eventually widened into a proper road. As they approached the ranch, details became clearer. The main house was indeed substantial, built of logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several smaller cabins were scattered nearby, and beyond them were the bunkhouses, barns, and other outbuildings essential to a working ranch. A man emerged from the largest barn as they approached, shading his eyes against the late afternoon sun. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. "Well, I'll be damned," the man called out as they drew closer. "Yancey Yates, as I live and breathe. Finally decided to take me up on my offer, did you?" Yancey dismounted, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Henry Garrison. Still ugly as sin, I see." The 2 men embraced roughly, slapping each other on the back with the easy affection of old friends. Then Henry's gaze shifted to Catherine, who remained mounted on Thunderbolt. "And who's this lovely lady?" he asked, his eyebrows rising in question. Yancey turned, extending a hand to help Catherine dismount. "Henry, I'd like you to meet Catherine Wilson. Catherine, this is Henry Garrison, the best cattleman in Northern California and the worst poker player west of the Mississippi." "Slander and lies," Henry protested good-naturedly, tipping his hat to Catherine. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Wilson." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Garrison," Catherine replied, immediately liking Yancey's friend with his open face and twinkling eyes. "Thank you for having us." Always room for Yancey and his. Henry paused, glancing between them with a perceptive look. "His lady friend." "We have quite a story to tell you," Yancey said, his expression growing more serious. "And we're in need of a fresh start, both of us." Henry studied them for a moment, taking in their travel-worn appearance and the clear bond between them. "Well, any story that brings Yancey Yates to my doorstep with a beautiful woman in tow is one I've got to hear. Come on inside. My wife will have dinner ready soon, and you both look like you could use a hot meal and a comfortable chair." The inside of the Garrison home was surprisingly elegant for a frontier ranch house. The main room featured a massive stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books. Hunting trophies and Western artwork adorned the walls, and brightly colored rugs covered the plank floors. Henry's wife, Clara, was a petite, dark-haired woman with a warm smile and quick, efficient movements. She welcomed them without question, immediately setting about preparing rooms and adding places at the dinner table. "You'll stay in the guest room tonight," she informed them, "and tomorrow we can figure out more permanent arrangements." Over a hearty dinner of roast venison, potatoes, and fresh bread, Yancey and Catherine took turns telling their story: Catherine's flight from her wedding, Yancey's impulsive assistance, the growing threat from the Blackburns, and their journey north. They omitted certain details, such as the nights spent in each other's arms, but the affection between them was evident nonetheless. Henry listened intently, his expression darkening when they described the bounty hunter and the false accusations of theft. "The Blackburns sound like real pieces of work," he commented when they finished. "But you're safe here. My ranch is my kingdom, and I don't take kindly to outsiders coming onto my land with ill intent." "We don't want to bring trouble to your door," Yancey said. "If there's any risk," Henry waved dismissively, "the risk is minimal. We're far from Sonora, and I have good relationships with the local law. Besides, I've been after you to come manage my horse breeding program for years. This just gives me the excuse I need to finally get you to settle down." He grinned. "Though it seems Miss Wilson has already accomplished what I couldn't." Catherine blushed, but Yancey just smiled, reaching for her hand under the table. "She's persuasive," he agreed. That night, despite being offered separate rooms, Catherine and Yancey chose to stay together in the guest room. As they prepared for bed, Catherine felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since, before her parents had announced her engagement to Harold. "We made it," she said softly as Yancey joined her by the window where she had been looking out at the stars. "We're safe." "We are," he agreed, slipping an arm around her waist. "And tomorrow we start building our life here." Catherine turned in his embrace, looking up at him with love and certainty. "Our life together." Yancey nodded, his blue eyes serious. "Catherine, I know this has all happened so quickly, but I want to do this right." He took a deep breath. "When the time is right, when you're ready, I want to marry you. Not because it's expected or arranged, but because I love you and want to spend my life with you." Catherine felt tears of happiness spring to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I want that too. A real marriage, based on love and choice and mutual respect." Yancey kissed her then, a kiss that sealed their promise to each other and heralded the beginning of their future together. In the weeks that followed, Catherine and Yancey settled into life at the Garrison Ranch. True to his word, Henry installed Yancey as manager of the horse breeding program, a position that came with a small cabin of their own at the edge of the property. The cabin was rustic but sound, with 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and windows that looked out over the rolling hills. Catherine quickly found her own place in the ranch community. She helped Clara Garrison organize the household, taught reading and basic arithmetic to the ranch hands' children, and learned the practical skills of frontier living from the other women. Word came, via Henry's business contacts, that the Blackburns were still searching for Catherine, but their efforts had become less intense as time passed, and more pressing financial matters demanded their attention. A drought had affected mining operations in Sonora, and Harold's father was facing challenges from newer, more aggressive banks opening in the region. Catherine wrote a letter to her parents, sending it through a circuitous route to avoid revealing her location. In it, she explained her reasons for fleeing, assured them of her safety and happiness, and expressed hope that someday they might understand her choice. Whether they would respond remained to be seen. As winter settled fully over the Northern California landscape, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of snow and ice, Catherine and Yancey's love continued to grow. They worked side by side during the days, shared quiet evenings by their fireplace, and planned for a spring wedding when the weather warmed and wildflowers bloomed in the meadows on Christmas Eve. A heavy snowfall blanketed the ranch, creating a hushed, magical atmosphere. The Garrisons hosted a celebration for all the ranch families, with music, food, and gifts exchanged by firelight. Catherine, wearing the completed shawl made from her wedding dress, now transformed into something beautiful and meaningful, stood beside Yancey as Henry raised a toast. "To new beginnings," Henry proclaimed, lifting his glass, "and to finding love in unexpected places." Later, as they walked back to their cabin through the gently falling snow, Yancey stopped suddenly and turned to Catherine. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait until morning, but—" He produced a small carved wooden box. "This seems like the right moment." Catherine opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, was a ring, a simple gold band with a small but perfect diamond that caught the moonlight and sparkled like the snow around them. "It's not fancy," Yancey said, suddenly uncertain. "I know you're used to finer things. It's perfect," Catherine interrupted, tears of joy freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. "Absolutely perfect." Yancey took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. "I love you, Catherine Wilson, more than I have words to say." "And I love you, Yancey Yates," she replied, her voice steady and sure. "More than I ever thought possible." As they sealed their formal engagement with a kiss, snowflakes swirling around them like nature's own celebration, Catherine marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From a runaway bride in a torn wedding dress to a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, and her true love, it was a path she could never have imagined, but one she would always be grateful she had taken. The wedding took place in May, when the meadows surrounding the ranch were carpeted with wildflowers, and the air was sweet with the scent of new growth. The ceremony was held outdoors, beneath an arch of twisted willow branches that Yancey had constructed himself. Catherine wore a simple dress of ivory linen that she and Clara had sewn together, adorned with lace from her transformed wedding dress. Around her shoulders was the shawl she had created from the same material, a symbol of how she had taken something meant for one purpose and reshaped it into something more meaningful, just as she had done with her life. Yancey, dressed in a new shirt and vest with his boots polished to a shine, waited for her beneath the arch. His face, when he saw her approaching on Henry's arm, was a study in love and wonder. The entire ranch community attended, along with friends from neighboring properties and the nearest town. Catherine had no family present. Her parents had never responded to her letter, but she found she didn't mind. These people, who had welcomed her and accepted her without judgment, had become her family now. The local minister performed the ceremony, but Catherine and Yancey had written their own vows, promises that spoke of choice and freedom, partnership and respect, adventure and home. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the assembled guests seemed to reach the very heavens. The celebration continued well into the night, with dancing, feasting, and storytelling. Catherine and Yancey moved through it all in a haze of happiness, scarcely believing that they had found such joy from such unlikely beginnings. "Happy?" Yancey asked as they swayed together to the music of a fiddle, the stars emerging overhead as dusk deepened into night. "Completely," Catherine assured him, her head resting against his chest. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he replied, echoing her own words from that snowy Christmas Eve. "You know, when you came running through Sonora in that torn wedding dress, I never imagined we'd end up here." Catherine smiled, remembering. "When you gave me your coat and your horse, I thought you were the most gallant man I'd ever met. I still do. And I thought you were the bravest woman I'd ever seen," Yancey said, his arms tightening around her. "I still do." Later, as they walked hand in hand to their cabin, now adorned with fresh paint and curtains at the windows, Catherine paused to look back at the celebration still in progress. Lanterns glowed warmly in the gathering darkness, illuminating the faces of friends who had become family. "This is what happiness looks like," she said softly. "Real happiness, not the kind that's bought or arranged or imposed." Yancey followed her gaze, understanding in his eyes. "It's what freedom looks like too," he added. "The freedom to choose your own path, your own life." He turned to her, his expression serious. "I will never take that freedom from you, Catherine. Even as my wife, you will always be your own woman." Catherine reached up to touch his face, her heart full to bursting with love for this extraordinary man. "And you will always be your own man, Yancey Yates. But we're also something more now. We're partners, equals on the same journey." "I like the sound of that," Yancey said, smiling down at her. "Partners." And as they continued to their home, to the beginning of their life together as husband and wife, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that running from her wedding that day in Sonora had been the best decision of her life. It had led her not just away from a future she didn't want, but toward one she had never dared to dream possible, a future built on love, respect, and the freedom to be truly herself. 5 years later, Catherine sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Yancey taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played with wooden blocks at Catherine's feet, occasionally looking up to clap as her brother successfully circled the small corral. The years had brought changes to their lives. Yancey's horse breeding program had become so successful that Henry had made him a partner in that aspect of the ranch. Catherine had established a proper school for the ranch children, teaching not just reading and arithmetic, but also literature, history, and science. They had heard, through infrequent correspondence with a few of Catherine's old friends, that Harold Blackburn had eventually married the daughter of another banker, a match that had strengthened his family's position in Sonora. The bounty for Catherine had been quietly withdrawn after the first year, and the scandal of her flight had faded into local legend. Catherine's parents had finally responded to her letters 2 years after her departure. The relationship remained strained, conducted entirely through carefully worded correspondence, but there was a tentative reconciliation underway. They had sent gifts for both grandchildren, though they had not yet visited. "Mama, look," Thomas called excitedly as he guided his pony through a figure-8 pattern under Yancey's watchful eye. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see you, darling," Catherine called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. "You're doing wonderfully." Elizabeth abandoned her blocks and toddled to the edge of the porch, her dark curls so like Yancey's bouncing with each step. "Tom, ride," she announced, pointing at her brother. Catherine scooped up her daughter, settling the child on her hip. "Yes, Thomas is riding, and someday you'll ride too." Yancey glanced over at them, his face breaking into a wide smile that still made Catherine's heart skip a beat after all these years. There were a few more lines around his eyes now, and a touch of silver at his temples, but he was as handsome as ever to her, perhaps more so, because those lines and silver threads represented years of shared happiness. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Yancey lifted Thomas from the pony and set him on his shoulders. Together, they approached the porch, both wearing identical expressions of accomplishment. "We have a natural-born horseman here," Yancey announced, swinging Thomas down to the porch steps. "Just like his father," Catherine said with a smile. Yancey climbed the steps and leaned in to kiss her, a gesture as natural as breathing after years of marriage. "And stubborn like his mother," he added in a whisper that only she could hear. Catherine laughed, shifting Elizabeth to her other hip. "I prefer the term determined," she countered. Determined then, Yancey conceded with a grin. He took Elizabeth from her arms, spinning the giggling child in a circle before setting her down beside her brother. "Who's hungry? I believe Mama made apple pie today." The children cheered and raced inside, their small boots thundering across the wooden floor. "They have so much energy," Catherine sighed, leaning against the porch railing. "Sometimes I can hardly keep up." Yancey moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You do a magnificent job, Mrs. Yates." "With the children, with the school, with everything." Catherine turned in his arms, linking her hands behind his neck. "We do a magnificent job, Mr. Yates. Together." They stood there for a moment, savoring the quiet connection before the happy chaos of family dinner would begin. The setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light, illuminating the life they had built together, the expanded cabin, the corral Yancey had constructed for the children's ponies, the garden Catherine had cultivated, the trees they had planted that were now beginning to provide shade. "Do you ever regret it?" Yancey asked suddenly. "Running away that day, choosing this life over the one you were raised for?" Catherine looked up at him, surprised by the question after all this time. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment." "How could I regret the choice that brought me everything I never knew I wanted?" Yancey's expression softened. "Even on the hard days, the blizzard last winter, the time Thomas had the fever, the drought 2 summers ago, especially on those days," Catherine insisted. "Because those were the days when I learned what real partnership means, facing challenges together, supporting each other through difficulties." She reached up to touch his face, a gesture that had become a habit over the years. "The life I was raised for would have been easier in many ways, but it would have been empty of everything that truly matters." Yancey turned his face to press a kiss to her palm, echoing the gesture from their first night together all those years ago. "I thank God every day for whatever courage or madness led you to run through Sonora in that wedding dress." Catherine smiled, remembering. "And I thank God for the gallant cowboy who gave me his coat and his horse and eventually his heart." From inside the cabin came the sound of a crash, followed by Elizabeth's wail and Thomas's hasty protestations of innocence. Yancey laughed, stepping back. "Duty calls, Mrs. Yates." "Indeed it does, Mr. Yates," Catherine agreed with a rueful smile. As they went inside to referee whatever minor disaster had occurred, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate flight from an unwanted wedding to this rich, full life of love and purpose, it was a path she could never have foreseen, but one she was profoundly grateful to have traveled. The torn wedding dress, transformed into a shawl that now hung carefully preserved in their bedroom, had become a symbol of her own transformation from a young woman defined by others' expectations to a woman who had claimed the right to define herself. And in doing so, she had found not just freedom, but a love deeper and truer than anything she had been taught to expect. It wasn't always easy, this life they had chosen. There were hardships and challenges, as there would be in any life. But they faced them together, partners in all things, bound not by convention or arrangement but by choice and love, a love that had begun with an act of kindness on a dusty street in Sonora, and had grown into the foundation of a family, a home, and a future filled with promise. And that, Catherine knew with absolute certainty, was worth more than all the security and luxury she had left behind.